Looking back now, she says the saddest part wasn't that her marriage ended, it was realizing it had been dying quietly for years, and she kept calling it normal. Today's story comes from a woman who wrote to us after her divorce was finalized at the age of 62. Not because she wanted sympathy, not because she wanted revenge. She said she simply wanted someone else to notice the small things before they became permanent, the things she ignored, the things she thought didn't matter, and the 5 things she now wishes she had never overlooked in her marriage. She met Daniel in 1983. She was 24, working at a small insurance office in Ohio, still carrying student debt, still trying to prove to her parents she could build a stable life on her own. Daniel was older by 5 years, calm, responsible, the kind of man who always seemed certain about what came next. And for a woman who grew up around chaos, certainty felt like love. She said the first years were good, maybe not passionate in the movie kind of way, but steady, safe, predictable. They bought a small house with yellow shutters, had 2 children, built routines, and somewhere inside those routines, she slowly began disappearing without noticing it. At first, it looked harmless. Daniel worked long hours, and she understood that. She told herself that providing for a family came with stress. When he came home quiet and distant, she didn't take it personally. When he stopped asking about her day, she assumed he was tired. When conversations became shorter, she blamed adulthood. That was the first thing she ignored. The silence, not the peaceful kind, the dangerous kind. The kind where 2 people stop being curious about each other. She said one night she sat across from him at the dinner table while their children argued over mashed potatoes, and she suddenly realized they had barely spoken in 3 days beyond bills, groceries, and schedules. 3 days, and somehow it felt normal. I told myself that's what marriage becomes after enough years, she wrote. I didn't realize silence can grow roots. What scared her most was how gradual it happened. There was no big fight, no betrayal, no dramatic collapse, just 2 people slowly becoming strangers while still sleeping in the same bed. And life kept moving. Soccer practices, mortgage payments, Christmas dinners, birthday cakes. From the outside, they looked successful. That's the strange thing about unhappy marriages. Sometimes they photograph beautifully, years passed, the children got older, Daniel became even more focused on work, promotions, business dinners, conferences, and she became the reliable one at home, the school volunteer, the appointment scheduler, the emotional manager of the entire family. She handled birthdays, dentist visits, permission slips, forgotten lunches, sick nights, and holiday planning while quietly convincing herself this imbalance was temporary. It wasn't. That became the second thing she ignored. Feeling emotionally alone while technically not being alone. One evening she got the flu so badly she could barely stand. She remembers sitting on the bathroom floor shaking with fever while hearing Daniel downstairs on a work call laughing with clients. He never checked on her, not once, and she told herself he was busy. That sentence became her shield for years. He's busy, but eventually she began asking herself a question she hated. If someone truly loves you, how busy can they really become before you stop existing in their world? She never asked him directly. That was part of the problem. She swallowed disappointment until it became part of her personality. And over time, resentment started replacing affection. Quietly, almost invisibly. She said resentment doesn't always arrive as anger. Sometimes it arrives as emotional exhaustion, as indifference, as no longer caring enough to explain why you're hurting. Then came the third thing she ignored, the way she stopped being herself around him. At some point in the marriage, she began editing parts of her personality to avoid conflict. She stopped bringing up subjects he dismissed, stopped talking about dreams he mocked, stopped mentioning how lonely she felt because he always responded with logic instead of tenderness. One night she mentioned wanting to take art classes after the kids left for college. Daniel laughed softly and said, "At your age, not cruelly, not loudly, just enough," and somehow those three words stayed with her for years. At your age. After that, she never mentioned it again. That's how certain marriages slowly erase people, not through violence, not through screaming, but through repeated small dismissals that teach someone their inner world no longer matters. She says something heartbreaking in her letter. I became easy to live with, and that cost me myself. By the time she turned 50, the children had moved out, and suddenly there was nothing left distracting them from each other. No noise, no school events, no chaos, just silence again. Except now it felt heavier. They would sit in the living room together watching television for hours without speaking. Sometimes she would look over at him and wonder if he would even notice if she disappeared. Then came the fourth thing she ignored, the absence of affection. Not just physical affection, emotional affection, gentleness, warmth, care. She couldn't remember the last time he touched her without routine behind it. No random hugs, no reaching for her hand, no looking at her like he was grateful she existed. And she blamed herself for that too. Maybe she had aged. Maybe she had become boring. Maybe this was simply what long marriages turned into. But deep down, she knew something important was missing. Human beings can survive without passion, but surviving without tenderness slowly changes the soul. Then something happened that shook her. Her younger sister Emily died unexpectedly from a stroke at 53, completely healthy one week, gone the next. And during the funeral, she watched Emily's husband cry beside the casket in a way that stunned her. Not because he was devastated, but because of how much love was visible between them even after death. He kept touching the coffin gently as if he still couldn't bear distance from her. And suddenly this woman realized something terrifying. If she died tomorrow, she wasn't sure Daniel would grieve the loss of her asterisk. He would grieve disruption, routine, history. But would he grieve her asterisk? That question followed her home like a ghost. She started noticing things she had ignored for decades. How he never looked up when she entered a room. How she had stopped laughing naturally around him. How every conversation felt transactional. How lonely their home actually was. Then one night everything cracked open. It was small, almost ridiculous. She had made dinner, pot roast, his favorite. She spent hours cooking because she wanted desperately to feel close to him again. When he sat down, he took one bite while scrolling through his phone, didn't look at her, didn't say thank you, nothing. And suddenly she burst into tears, not graceful tears, the kind that come from years of emotional starvation. Daniel looked confused, actually confused, as if her sadness had appeared out of nowhere. And that's when she realized the fifth thing she had ignored. She had spent years expecting him to magically understand needs she never fully forced into the light. Years hoping he would notice. Years waiting for change without demanding honesty. She finally told him everything that night. How lonely she felt, how invisible she felt, how disconnected they had become. And his response broke her heart more than yelling ever could have. He said quietly, "I thought you were fine." Fine. That word haunted her afterward because she had worked so hard to appear understanding, patient, low maintenance, and strong that even her own husband no longer recognized her pain. They tried counseling for almost a year, and to their credit, Daniel did try in some ways, but by then, decades of emotional distance had hardened into habit. Some damage becomes structural, like cracks inside a foundation. You can repaint the walls, but the house still shifts underneath you. One afternoon during therapy, the counselor asked them a simple question. When was the last time you genuinely enjoyed each other? Neither of them could answer. Not immediately, not even after thinking. And she said that silence told her more than any argument ever had. Their marriage hadn't died suddenly, it had faded from neglect. Like a garden nobody watered because both people assumed the other person eventually would. The divorce happened quietly. No scandal, no affair, no dramatic courtroom battle. Just two exhausted people sitting across from lawyers admitting they no longer knew how to reach each other. Their children took it hard, mostly because they never saw it coming. That happens often in long marriages. Children see structure. They don't always see emotional absence. After the divorce, she moved into a small apartment near the coast in South Carolina. For the first time in 40 years, she lived alone. And she said the silence there felt different, not painful, honest. The first few months were brutal. She would still reach for a second coffee mug in the mornings before remembering. She would hear good news and instinctively think to tell Daniel. 40 years doesn't disappear quickly. Even unhappy love leaves fingerprints. But slowly she began rediscovering pieces of herself she thought were gone forever. She enrolled in an art class. At 62, the same dream she buried decades earlier after hearing "at your age," and the strange thing was she wasn't even particularly talented, but she loved it, loved the smell of paint, loved sitting near windows with strangers, loved creating something without needing permission. One day her instructor asked why she started so late in life, and she almost cried answering, because she realized how many years she spent believing her desires were inconveniences instead of part of being alive. That realization hurt more than the divorce itself. She says people often assume the biggest regrets come from dramatic mistakes, affairs, financial ruin, explosive fights, but her deepest regret was smaller and quieter than that. She regrets how long she abandoned herself while trying to preserve peace, how many conversations she avoided, how many lonely nights she normalized, how many years she waited for someday. And she wanted people listening to understand something important. Neglect doesn't always look cruel. Sometimes it looks polite, functional, responsible. Sometimes two decent people slowly stop nurturing each other because life becomes logistics instead of connection. And one day they wake up emotionally bankrupt. Near the end of her letter, she wrote something I haven't forgotten. She said, "If you still love each other, don't wait for a crisis before you start paying attention. Talk now. Ask difficult questions now. Notice each other now. Because distance grows quietly, and once years disappear, they rarely return the way you imagined they would." She says she still cares about Daniel. That's what makes the story sadder. There was no villain, just time, habit, silence. And two people who assumed love could survive indefinitely without being fed. The last time she saw him was at their granddaughter's school concert. They sat 3 seats apart. Older now, softer somehow, less angry. When the concert ended, Daniel helped her put on her coat because her wrist had been hurting. Such a small gesture, but she said it nearly broke her because it reminded her how many years they spent capable of tenderness while somehow forgetting to use it. Before she ended her letter, she listed the 5 things she wishes she had never ignored in her marriage: the silence, the loneliness, the loss of herself, the absence of affection, and the belief that there would always be more time to fix things later. There usually isn't. And maybe that's the hardest truth about relationships. Most endings don't happen in one moment. They happen slowly, quietly, over years of postponed conversations and unnoticed pain, until one day, two people look at each other and realize they remember the history but can no longer feel the closeness. Sometimes we lose people long before they actually leave. And sometimes the saddest part of growing older is finally understanding what mattered after time has already taken it away. If this story meant something to you, perhaps it's because some part of it felt familiar. And if someone in your life still reaches for your hand, don't ignore that.